Bienvenidos a una nueva entrega de CESA Talks. En este espacio es un gusto tener al experto en inteligencia artificial Wayne Holmes, profesor de University College London. El profesor Holmes es consultor en tecnología e inteligencia artificial para la UNESCO, investigador senior del Josef Stefan Centro de Investigación de IA con sede en Eslovenia y prolijo autor de varias publicaciones sobre temas que hoy nos ocupan, sobre todo la inteligencia artificial y la educación. It's really good to have you here, Wayne, and I am so thrilled to be able to have an interesting talk today about AI and education.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here.
Oh, it's great, it's great. And I want to start talking a little bit about one of your articles that I read and I really liked. I actually read it last week when I heard you were coming. It's called Ethics of AI and Education Towards a Community-Wide Framework. I think it's one of your most cited works as well, very, very important. And you have a phrase there that really struck me. I loved it. It says, at a more general level, there is also a need to differentiate between doing ethical things and doing things ethically, to understand and to make pedagogical choices that are ethical. And I really want to talk about that. I love the phrase.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a challenging one sometimes to explain. The best example I can give, or easiest, is maybe the use of AI in e-proctoring. So these systems that are designed to check whether or not students are cheating in their online exams. Now, the academics and research and developers who are building those tools, they work really hard to ensure that they're being ethical at every step. So they want to make sure that they protect student privacy. They want to make sure that the systems don't interfere with the way the students are engaged in their exams, that they're not intrusive, all those kind of things. And they generally work quite hard. Another example is the so-called intelligent tutoring systems, where the students engage with an online tool to learn about some topic or other. And there again, they work really hard to think about, well, what are we trying to achieve with that student, and how are we going to protect that student's privacy and agency there. So for me, that's what I refer to as doing things ethically, because in doing those things, they are trying to tick all those ethical boxes. But, and that's where it comes in, the big but is taking a step outside. So I describe those researchers as working within a bubble, and within that bubble they are doing things ethically. They are checking, they are making sure that their tools are being ethical. But when we step out of that bubble and then we think again about those the whole approach, and the question is what you're doing an ethical choice at all? So in the case of e-proctoring, is that ethical? Doing it ethically is one thing, but is it itself an ethical thing to do? Are we imposing on students? Are we making assumptions? Are we treating all students as cheats by default? And guilty until proven innocent, rather than the way we traditionally do it. And so we really need to think about the whole project itself. Is the project itself ethical?
And I think that goes to thinking about, one thing is to have an ethical outcome, and one thing is having an ethical process, right? And I think that for education is very important, because it's not only about AI, but I think a lot of the things that might happen in education, when we evaluate, when we measure learning, the outcome might be ethical, but maybe the process is not always the same. Are we treating all students the same, and is that actually what we should be doing in the first place?
Yeah, I think the discussion is around which is the more important, is the process or the outcome more important. I think that's really, really interesting as well. And yeah, I agree with you. It's thinking about the whole, what is the purpose of the education, right? We don't have those conversations enough. It's assumed that everyone's in agreement about what the purpose is.
It's tough.
But actually, there's a huge difference between, to take two extremes. On the one hand, ensuring that our students come out with more qualifications, and on the other hand, ensuring our students self-actualise, are able to engage with things in critical ways, are able to play a productive role in society going forward. Now, maybe those two things can coincide, but the point is they don't necessarily coincide. And sometimes when the emphasis is on one, the measurable
we lose.
outcomes, we lose the other. And that itself is an ethical decision made at a much higher level.
And does that also take us to an issue in AI that is tacit, but it's as AI sort of unfolds and it becomes more sort of a part of every system, right? And we systematize education more and more. We are so obsessed with standardization, right? Like, and that sometimes I feel like, and I feel it in Colombia and many universities where I've taught, studying the global South, where they're more interested in having a standardized system rather than a good system of measuring learning or generating an experience. And then you go up and say, can we change this? Like, no, you can't, because quality can't let you change this. And it's like, what is quality? Oh, it's a person that decided that. And then you get sort of tangled up into this sort of red tape AI machine thingy that tells you what to do. And it's very tricky to get out of it after you're there, because...
I agree, but I think, we have to understand that the situation in the global South and in universities is very challenging, because constantly they're being criticised for not achieving the standards of the global North, right? Whatever that means. And so it's very, very difficult and challenging. So how one of the ways in which universities in the global South one of the ways in which they can demonstrate that they are strong and powerful institutions
is a process.
Is a process.
Actually, the structure of it, not the quality of the process.
Yeah, absolutely, but one that mirrors the global North.
Exactly.
Because if they're doing it and it's so powerful, then so the ambition is to get to that same approach by doing those same kind of things. So I understand that pressure, but I'm not convinced that's the way forward.
I agree, and the question
it's
is
about understanding what is unique to institutions, such as in Colombia, such as other, Southeast Asia. What are the things that are unique about those environments? So one of the things that I really worry about is, the concept of personalisation in learning. Now, personalisation is a really big push, and particularly supported by an AI. But the reality is that it's a Silicon Valley neoliberal approach to education, the reification of the individual, right? And that's really problematic, and it's quite contrary to many cultures in the global South. Where is that? We need to give that space for that voice to come in here, to think about, really, is personalisation such a good thing? Should we not be thinking about the collective, the global, the social in our learning, and how people, when we value what people have achieved, it's not about that individual, the American dream. It's about actually moving society forward collectively together. And of course they're going to be, all of that's going to go on. But that's what I would love to see, is the global South not judging itself
and trying to fit shoes that were never theirs or ours, for that matter.
Exactly.
Yes, I agree. And I think that what you're saying really resonates with me, being able to teach both in the North and the South at some point, and thinking that maybe we have to think what we need to be rather than try to fit a mold that will never sort of be there, right? Because as soon as we fit that mold, the North has moved to something else, and it's like an impossible race, right? Where it's just not there.
I agree. And the point about the AI is that it's mirroring the global North approach, and what we need is local voices. So the problem is that the dominant voices are the Googles, the Facebooks, the big, and the Chinese companies as well, the Baidus, etc. And people in the global South are having to work within that spectrum. And that's really difficult, because it's also, it's a form of neocolonialism, in the sense that the data that's being created in Colombia, for example, is leaving Colombia. You don't get to access it, you don't get to use it in ways that are productive.
We can't monetize it in the same level or at the same sort of impact.
But in order to gather that data, it imposes a particular structure on what's happening here.
But I also think about sort of AI, right? And AI it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter about your history, it's still right there, and it's the same sort of big machine sort of working and processing data, right? And one thing that I always think about as a teacher is, how should we adapt teaching, right, to be able to provide the best thinking framework for a future professional, now that we have this machine that is probably unstoppable now, right? We can't just unplug it and say, oh, we made a mistake, I'm sorry. So what should we do as teachers?
I think that one of the reasons I've been involved in technology and education for so long is because when we think about the technology, when we're thinking about, well, how do we mechanise this, how do we automate something, how do we inject the technology into it, it makes us think about and question the pedagogy, the way that we're teaching. It makes us question the way we're assessing. So I think that's the answer to the question you're saying. What we need is to rethink all of this. And I'm not arguing I've got the answers, right? I'm not suggesting that at all.
I was hoping.
But I do think, rethinking assessment, for example. So, when that famous, ChatGPT came out 6 months ago, the immediate reaction across the world of universities was, oh my God, this is a charter for cheating for students. What do we do about this? And I think, focusing on that, I think, is a real problem, because again, it's the guilty to proven innocent approach that everyone's worrying about. But actually, more importantly, it means we need to rethink, how do we assess? Or as you mentioned earlier, what do we assess? Why are we assessing something? Why do we value one thing over another thing? And traditionally, it's been because we are focusing on things that are easily measurable, where we can assign numbers to. Because one of the things we must remember is our policymakers, they love easy numbers.
Yes.
That makes their life a lot more structured.
It's quite lazy, but quite easy to show results, not impact, but results.
Yeah, and it's kind of understandable. But we know that education, teaching and learning, developing human cognition, developing self-actualization, developing social capital, all those kind of things are incredibly complex, incredibly nuanced in many, many different ways. And so we need to be able to engage with those issues in different ways. One of the things that I think these tools are making us think about is what's been called the 21st century skills. So we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about criticality. Those kind of issues are becoming far more important, and this is an opportunity. So instead of thinking how do we automate these processes, how do we automate assessment, let's think about how we can change assessment, how we can innovate assessment. So the phrase I've got is poor pedagogic practices. Instead of doing that, perpetuating poor pedagogic practices by saying, well, we've got the technology, how do we automate what we've been doing for the past 100 years? That's ridiculous. What's the point? What we should be doing instead is saying, look, we have an amazing opportunity here. These technologies allow so many things that we weren't able to do before. And we need to think about how do we apply that so that we are assessing the kind of things that we as educators and our students believe are important. And AI that's indirect, so things like AI to help tackle climate change, or AI to help tackle forest fires, or AI to help tackle other mechanical things to predict the weather, all those kind of things. I think there's an awful lot of amazing work going on in those spaces, and that needs to be encouraged. But it's the work of the AI that's directly impacting on humans, such as in education, but such as in things like the fake news and all those kind of things, such as the prediction of our what we want to buy. I've had an account with Netflix for many years, and Netflix is one of the companies with one of the biggest AI units of teams. And yet I cannot remember a single time when they've recommended something to me and I thought, yeah, I'd like to watch that. It's the power of these things is really quite misplaced in many senses. So the belief that actually they can do these amazing things, and the reality is they can't. They're not really as amazing as we think they are. Again, in my talk, I mentioned about using AI to discover vaccines during the COVID pandemic. Didn't happen. So it's impressive stuff, but let's not get carried away with how impressive it is, because it's actually not that impressive in many times.
Of course. One is when you have a tool that makes your life simpler, and then you kind of use it for everything, right? But in the other hand is, can we teach the students to first assess the problem they have and then determine what kind of tool is best for the situation, right? And I think there we are not doing a very good job yet, right? In terms of, can we teach the student to have that sort of deep criteria about what are the options they have, and then
I
pick
agree.
the best one.
It's not just the students, it's the engineers.
Yes,
the AI engineers.
Of course,
they're doing exactly the same. But the problem is, so long as we're going back full circle in a sense to what we think the purpose of education is. Because if the purpose of education is to get credentials, to get qualifications, and that's it, then why can we criticise a student for taking the shortcuts to get the credentials? Yeah, it makes perfect sense. If, on the other hand, we're valuing the process and the ways in which we're helping them learn to think, then the credentials are not as important in that kind of way, and therefore we're not using the tools to continue to build that. So it's self-fulfilling, isn't it? So long as we're arguing that's the way forward, then we build tools to make that happen. It just makes it worse. Whereas, where are the tools that we can use to break this apart? So, ChatGPT is an example. It obviously can be used in a myriad of ways. But one of the ways it can be used is, I want to write an essay, write a prompt that writes an essay on this topic, boom, it's done it, move on. That is a way to use ChatGPT. I have to say, if you do that, you're going to end up with a really poor essay, but nevertheless it's possible. But the other way is to engage with it and to try and encourage it and use it to force you to rethink things, to break the ideas up, to take alternative perspectives. But it's very poor at that personalised learning thing. And when I first started to play with the tool, I asked it to write a critique on personalised learning. It couldn't do that. It just told me how good personalised learning was. So I said, okay, you've told me how good it is, now write a critique of that. It still couldn't do it. And the only negative we could come up with was it's difficult to implement.
Of course.
Right? And so the reason for this is because of how it works, how it does its job.
Exactly. Understanding what it does and how it does it is very important to use it.
It's fundamentally important, yes. And it's only if we can get that understanding, throughout the life course. We need young children to understand it. We need university students to understand it. We need people in business to understand it. We need policymakers to understand it, right? Across the limitations of these technologies. Not in, it's hard to do, but in terms of how the very way in which it's constructed means that its outputs and what it's going to suggest is going to be profoundly limited, and in particular is going to marginalise voices that are already marginalised. I mean, that is not understood at all by most people who use these tools. They think it's definitive, it's excellent, it's brilliant. It is amazing, I'm not disputing that. But we really have to be careful.
No, I think this has been wonderful, and I have so many more questions, but we're running out of time. So I wanted to thank you for this wonderful sort of talk and this important discussion around AI and education. Y a todos, muchas gracias por acompañarnos en CESA Talks, y hasta la próxima, no se la pierdan. Feliz día para todos.
Thank you
so much for being here, and it was wonderful.